Welcome back. I'm still with the Auditor-General of South Africa, Mr. Kimi Makwetu, and he's got to tell us the truth as is. And we are also pleased that he's got additional powers to go after those who may have caused the dire situation that we find ourselves in. You said 100 billion rands has been lost due to irregular spending, right? But do you take any remedial action? Is there anything that can be done to recover the money?
So, Tim, as you've already led me on to this, end of last year, after a very rigorous parliamentary process, around the 18th of November, the President appended his signature to the amendments to the Public Audit Act. And of course, we now have that as an authorized amendment. It will do three things. As I said earlier on, in the past, we never really used to analyze some of these items. Let's take this 100 billion of irregular expenditure as an example. Come the effective date of this act, which we have proposed to be from 1 April onwards, meaning that those audits that we are going to do this year will fall into the period in which this law applies. So we've got this 100 billion. And our teams go through the work that they normally go through. They don't just now leave it in the hands of the accounting officer to sort it out and hopefully next year it will be fixed. We are now required to analyze these items and identify those that can be condoned without further effort. Because in any system, there will be people who will err, but we don't want them to commit too many mistakes frequently. So we'll give that part of it to them, let's say 20 of that, and we say this 20 is possibly pardonable if those that are charged with governance in the institution will activate the provisions of the Public Finance Management Act and investigate specifically or condone those items. Could be things like there was a big fire in Knysna. There were extraordinary expenditures that would not ordinarily lend themselves to the normal systems of procurement. Yeah. Maybe let's say Knysna is one of that 20 billion. Then we say, Council, have a look at these items. These were procurement expenditures that were done in the
emergency situation. Yep.
So they are possibly able to be condoned for as long as you follow the rules in condoning them. However, there's the balance of 80 that's left. This is now assuming the law is in place. All of our audit teams are required to analyze that 80, identify whether in that 80 there are significant issues pertaining to signs of material irregularity. Things like this payment was made in advance to this service provider on whatever date. 6 months later, the auditors are not yet able to locate an invoice. That is suddenly flashing a red light to say, auditors, watch out, there's something funny that could happen. Now the law has given us three options. In that bag of 80, we need to identify those and say we are going to refer them as a first instance to an authorized body in the public sector to investigate with a view to getting the detail back to us as an audit office. Because in an audit, as you know, we've only got a space of 2 months almost to go through the books, identify stuff that's gone wrong, but we don't have the luxury of time to go into the actual causes and the detail behind it. Hence the referral power, number one. So it won't be left in its own devices, nor is it going to go back to the person who might have caused it. Second, and then it will be, another power then will be to issue specific recommendations in the audit report of that institution as we finish the audit. So we'll make a recommendation that is not binding because it's in the realm of a recommendation. We recommend that you institute processes to beef up your staff in your finance department so that these reconciliations can be done within a specified period. If you don't do it, that recommendation becomes a remedial action, which is binding. And I'm sure you'll remember in the analysis of the Concord when they spoke to the issue of a binding remedial action, they made a broad reference to Chapter 9 institutions and said, if remedial actions of Chapter 9 institutions were not binding, then you might as well forget about it. Because if nobody is going to be shaken by the strength of that remedial action, we might as well close shop. But the last one, if you also ignore that remedial action within a specified period, the audit office will then be given the power, it's already there, to issue what we call a certificate of debt if that material irregularity has resulted in financial loss to the public purse.
So meaning that you will have the powers then to recover the monies where they've been lost, and if you are not able to, then to pursue, let's call it criminal charges and prosecution. Will those be the consequences?
That's what it means.
All right.
Yes.
Now, a quick question. I'll go back to what I asked earlier on when I said, who is supposed to hold these departments accountable? I would have thought that Parliament, because you report to Parliament, that Parliament will be much more sensitive to seeing the trends. Where we started, we said it was 20 billion in 2011, for instance, and now 100 billion. Surely parliamentarians can see that there's something that's going on that's not right.
Well, I can almost say, Tim, that they've done the bit that they can. If you think about it, one committee in Parliament that is often dealing with these matters is your Standing Committee on Public Accounts.
SCOPA, as we popularly call it, yeah.
Yes. So they're the ones that would do this. But there are also other similar structures in municipalities, like Municipal Public Accounts Committee would be another one. But the reality of it, Tim, is that the year-on-year growth in this irregular expenditure, I would almost say that it almost made some of them numb, if you like, because it's almost these staggering figures that come up all the time, and then there's an interaction in Parliament, and then there's a lot of shouting at each other about what needs to be done, and conclusions are reached.
And then move on to the next.
And then the following year, you get bombarded with a lot of other things.
Yeah.
So I think part of it is also the extent to which there's the capacity to pursue diligently throughout.
But with the commissions that are sitting now and the revelations coming out of that, do you think that what we see is helpful, including the strengthening of the Auditor-General's Act?
No, certainly I think it is, Tim. The amount of resources, as you could see, coming out of the commissions. I mean, the other side of the commissions is giving us an insight into something else that was happening while we were looking at other things. And I think it is helpful that we're getting all of this evidence coming out in the open, so that when we strengthen those structures of governance, we at least know what it is that has damaged over time.
But here's a disturbing thing, though. You know, in your profession, as being the Auditor General, that the auditing profession itself has not covered itself in glory in some of the stories that we hear, that it is actually the professionals who advised some of the people who are now implicated in wrongdoing on how to go about doing wrong and engaging in this irregular expenditure or corrupt practices. So what's your view of the auditing profession and the accounting profession at this time?
Well, I think no one can genuinely escape the culpability. Some people argue that it's just a small drop, but that small drop, when you clean it up, the stain never disappears. Particularly if it's on a white background, you know, the stain will always be there even if you try to clean it up. But the worrying part of it is that, I mean, take an example, for example, with the issue of the assessed losses that were canvassed at the Zondo Commission, you know, with regards to the Bosasa matter. Only a well-trained accountant with a proper understanding of the tax system would prevail with that type of advice on their client. And really what it means is that use everything possible, as long as we will be walking on the yellow line, almost. Do everything possible to make sure that you do not lose this 37 million worth of assessed losses, because this is money that potentially, once you trade, you are going to need in order to reduce your tax liability over time. But there are rules that govern how it is used.
I mentioned something about the safety of members of staff, your colleagues within the Auditor General's office. What is the extent of threats to their lives, especially when they uncover wrongdoing? I know there's one instance, I think it was it Mfuleni and in Tshwane, where they had to be moved around a bit because they were receiving death threats. What's happening there?
I mean, we were alive to this fact when we were digging deeper into these areas of irregular expenditure. We knew that they are going to shake other people a bit, and they are going to become uncomfortable once they know that we are digging where other people aren't allowed to. So we've had it predominantly at times when we were heading towards the reporting date for our reports. But it has not been consistently there every day, every month, and so on. It's when the matters that have been picked up in an audit start to rear the ugly head, and everybody can see that something is about to blare up in this area. Only then do those type of threats come in. And our experience has been that we've had it in Mfuleni, in the situation that you outlined. We've had it in KZN, for example, as well as in places like Tshwane and other municipalities in the West Rand.
Now, when are we going to see the results of the strengthened law which allows you to implement remedial action, and what type of consequences can we expect from then on?
So where we start with this, Tim, is that we're not trying to introduce something that is completely unrelated to the existing laws. Because the very occurrence of irregular expenditure, the very occurrence of fruitless and wasteful expenditure, and all such inefficient utilization of public resources is already catered for in the existing laws. What we have noticed is that even if people divert from those laws, nothing happens to them. So what this new power is doing now is to say, let us not veer far away from the likes of the provisions of the Public Finance Management Act. We will ask you questions in the audit about what did you do when you approved the capital expenditure of 20 million. Did you apply your mind to the appropriateness of that particular expenditure? Because that particular power is the power of an accounting officer. There's another one in the same responsibilities of an accounting officer which says you must put everything in place to make sure that you prevent instances of fruitless, wasteful and irregular expenditure. When we pick it up in an audit, we are going to drill down to check with the accounting officer whether they have put in place the necessary control instruments to prevent it, because to prevent it is cheaper than to chase around for it, trying to detect it as well as trying to correct it. Because in the three systems of control, prevention is the best one, at least as far as these are concerned. So what we're going to try and move towards is to insist that even if you as an accounting officer, you are not an accountant, but you've got a budget to employ accountants, all you need to do is to supervise them, make sure that if you've put in 20 million into a project, it substantially goes towards what was intended.
Sure. Well, let's end it right here, and we'll be watching the developments in your space very closely. 100 billion rands is a lot of money. And of course, I did mention the fact that the interest burden on the taxpayers, as the Minister of Finance said, is 1 billion rands a day. That's a lot of money. Good luck to you.
Thanks very much, Britain.
And your staff at the Auditor-General's office. And that's all we have for you. Thank you for joining the Modise Network. And be sure to tune in again next week from us. Enjoy the rest of your day.